Hello, I am Dr. Dan Kalish, and welcome to our presentation today, put on with a combination of the Kalish Institute and Diagnostic Solutions Lab, one of the premier labs in the functional medicine arena. And we are specifically today going to talk about unraveling chronic fatigue and how you can interpret and understand organic acids testing as it comes through mitochondrial health specifically. Really narrow little niche. Is this all of chronic fatigue? No, this is just like a super important piece that most people want to learn about so you can help people, but it's, you know, a key component that you have to master, understanding how to work with mitochondria, how to test for them, how to fix them. And this is classic functional medicine 101. So for those of you that are brand new, and by the way, we had a huge number of people sign up. So thank you guys for signing up for this. This is great. We want to support the lab company, Diagnostic Solutions. We want to support their testing. And, you know, it's great to have an audience to present this information to. So for those of you that are brand new, I am Dan Kalish. I founded the Kalish Institute almost 20 years ago. Next year is our 20-year anniversary. I've trained thousands of functional medicine practitioners, been involved with research studies with Mayo Clinic, and I've been IFM certified, been in practice for 33 years, and so on. But for today, we're going to talk about a scientist. His name is Richard Lord, and he is the original scientist that developed organic acids testing. He conceptualized of it in the 1960s. He executed and created the first lab in functional medicine to do organic acids testing, let's say 1980s, early 80s, mid 80s. And he was my teacher and mentor for a dozen years. I still talk to him occasionally, but we don't work together as closely as we used to. And when Richard and I used to, look at organic acids tests together, he would say, like, "Never seen that before, Dan?" And I'd be like, "Oh, if he's never seen it, it's never ever been even on a test," because he like literally ran the lab that did all the original organic acids testing for like 40 years. So what I'm conveying to you today is the work of Richard Lord, and what a wonderful decade he and I had together. It was best 10 years of my life. He's a great guy, still alive. He's just kind of in his mid 80s and is kicking back a little bit, living his life on his lakeside house in the Georgia mountains. God bless Richard Lord. Okay, so for those of you that really want to learn the original Dr. Lord work, really want to get into understanding this test at the highest level humanly possible, Diagnostic Solutions and I have put together a special organic acids interpretation bootcamp. You get 20% off if you use these codes. Get your cameras out, your phones, scan that QR code, sign up for this class. It starts October 7th. And at the end of this course, if you sign up for this bootcamp, you will get it. You'll start to get it. You'll really be able to apply this directly. And today's class is just a presentation to see if you're interested in taking this other course from us, because we want to, be straightforward about the curriculum that we're presenting. And for those of you that are like, "Oh, this was pretty good," then sign up for the class. These boot camps are inexpensive. It's not a big financial commitment. It's not a big time commitment, and you can learn a ton in a short period of time. All right, so that is coming up in a month or two. So now, there are a lot of slides. Let me just tell you what we're going to do. So we've got like an hour or a little bit less. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly, and we're not even going to look at all of them, but they're here kind of like as reminders and placeholders, because I want to spend the second half of the hour looking at labs, reviewing them, and designing programs. Okay, so some of you may get upset when I skip slides. I'm sorry, it's just the way it's going to be. And then the reason why I stack too many slides in here is because once we get to the lab part, I'm going to want to come back and look at these slides, and because you guys are going to ask questions, and I'm going to want these slides. All right, so that's like the game plan. And we do want you to ask questions, so type in questions, as much as you want. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, for all those of you signing up for this boot camp, in this boot camp, you not only get an online curriculum that describes how to use this test, but then it also describes, we also have live Q&A calls where we review your labs that you've done on yourself, that labs that you've done on your patients. So this is a hands-on interactive boot camp where you're learning with your real cases, all the original work of Richard Lord. And there are thousands of things that Richard taught me that are not written down anywhere. They're not in any book. They're just passed on from generation to generation of practitioner. And it is my role and obligation and responsibility at this point in time to pass on Richard's work to you guys, the next generation. That's why he spent 10, 12 years training me twice a week. He didn't do that to be nice to me. He did that because he knew that I would carry on the work. And that is the goal of these kinds of classes. And by the way, Diagnostic Solutions Lab, several of the people that work there and have primary roles there worked with and knew Dr. Richard Lord a while ago. So let's just say there's decades and decades of experience, like 40 years of experience here built into this boot camp. It's not about me and my like personal experience. It's about the original science behind all this work. And in fact, I think organic acids as this topic has been just grossly misinterpreted. And we want to set the record straight and give you guys the real clinical information that you need. Some of the most important patterns that you can see on these tests are not known anywhere. They're just not written down, and you just know where it's hard to learn them. Okay, so sign up for the boot camp if you have any interest in this stuff, right? Okay, so here's what we're really talking about. This is the citric acid cycle, or TCA cycle, or Krebs cycle, how we make ATP. This up here is the electron transport chain. Okay, and the way this works is we take glucose, we convert it into pyruvate, and that pyruvate gets into the mitochondria. So up here where it says glucose, that's the cytoplasm of the cell, and this little border right here is the mitochondria. So it gets into the mitochondria, and then we break it down in the citric acid cycle or TCA cycle for energy. We can also take fatty acids, convert them into acetyl-CoA, right? Going through beta oxidation and make energy out of fat. So as you guys are just sitting here listening, 60, 70, maybe more of your percent of your energy is coming from the burning of fatty acids. That process is called beta oxidation. If you want mitochondria to work efficiently, you have to have like great beta oxidation. We just finished the Tour de France, didn't we? And Tajay, the guy that wins every bike ride in the world right now, is considered to have the most efficient and best functioning mitochondria of any human being who's alive right now. Okay, and how did he train to get the best functioning mitochondria? He is really, really good at sprinting. No, really, really good at beta oxidation. So the best cyclists in the world, the people who want the best mitochondrial performance humanly possible, spend most of their training time training for beta oxidation. Okay, super, super important process here. This is not a peripheral pathway, and it doesn't get any attention in integrative medicine compared to glucose. Now, I'm not like pro-glucose and anti-fatty acids or whatever. I'm saying glucose and insulin resistance are the most important thing, so they get a lot of attention. But beta oxidation is like even more important than the most important thing when it comes to mitochondrial function, because this is our major fuel supply for energy, fat. Glucose, super important. What happens to most human beings these days is they screw up their glucose metabolism because they eat poor quality food and they get stressed out of their minds and they have all kinds of other issues going on. And so insulin resistance starts, and that makes the whole fatty acid burning thing even worse. So when we want to unravel and figure out how we can address fatigue, you have to be sure the patient can get glucose into the citric acid cycle, and maybe even more importantly, because this is often missed, get fatty acids through beta oxidation. And we're going to look at lab values for that, supplement protocols to test for and correct all this. There's also the electron transport chain, where, as you remember from school, we pump these hydrogen ions, these protons, up into this space here, and then they come cascading down, and it spins this little wheelie thing, and that's how we ultimately make ATP. And in order to do all that, you got to bump these these electrons along, bunga, bunga, bung. That's why they call it the electron transport chain. It's being transported. And what is the major transporter that we can easily measure and correct is CoQ10. They have it represented here just as Q, which is kind of funny. If you've ever seen the James Bond movie, I think Q is the guy that would like give James the like watch that would blow up in the fancy cars and stuff. But CoQ10, that's the Q here, escorts electrons from complex 1 to complex, from complex 2 to complex 3, and does a bunch of other things. So CoQ10 ends up being super important in this whole process too. What's the nutrient that works on converting fatty acids, getting them into the mitochondria so you can run beta oxidation? That's a question. Let's see if anyone types it in. If you don't know the answer to this question, you should definitely take the boot camp, okay? Because this is the most important nutrient to get. Okay, so Cheryl, you don't have to take the boot camp. She got it right. Daniela, you don't have to take boot camp. Okay, there's like 1,200 of you on this call. 2 of you got that question right. So the rest of you, you got to take this class. You have to know this is like the most important process, okay? It's carnitine. Carnitine is what escorts or pulls the fatty acid over into the mitochondria. If you don't know how to test for and correct carnitine problems, then take the boot camp. I'll show you how to do it, okay? You're not going to learn enough just in this little class today, but this is just sort of a teaser to get you going. I also just wanted to mention, in fairness to amino acids, that amino acids are really important too for the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle. And this is the diagram that shows how and where amino acids enter into energy production pathways. Okay, so shout out for amino acids. You can use free-form amino acids as part of this too, because we're going to spend most of our time talking about glucose metabolism and fatty acids. So I just didn't want to completely ignore amino acids. Okay, so now 3 of you got the carnitine question right out of, okay. So anyways, take the boot camp. Here are the key players in inflammation. And why is this important? Well, there's a very famous scientist. His name is Robert Naviaux. And I was at a conference 3 or 4 years ago. I was at the dinner for the people putting on the conference, and I walked in and I sat down at the only empty chair. There was maybe 20 people sitting on this big table, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I looked to my right, and there's this nice older looking guy who seemed like a nice guy, and look at him, and I was like, holy moly, that's Dr. Robert Naviaux. Just sat down next to him, and I ended up having like a 3 or 4 hour dinner sitting next to Robert Naviaux. I got to ask him every question I ever had. It was so cool. So he is like, conceptually, Dr. Naviaux, I think, is the thought leader in creating a model for how mitochondria work and don't work, and how all that fits in with a chronic health problem. So you can look him up, Robert Naviaux. His work is profound. He's a research scientist, and he works a lot with autistic kids. He works a lot with just the general genetic underpinnings of mitochondrial issues. But his model is truly profound. And again, he's worth reading up on. And his model says that when the mitochondria are, and he's proven all this with his research, right? He's a researcher, genetics-based, I think he's an MD, PhD researcher kind of person. So his model says that when we're under certain kinds of stress, the mitochondria just basically freak out, and they go into either battle mode or attack mode or defense mode, or however you want to say it. But they freak out just like if you were walking down the street or walking on a path in the woods and you saw like a 20-foot snake right in front of you. Yeah, you just freak out. Okay, so mitochondria freak out like that. And when they freak out, they do very specific things, which are very destructive in the long term, but kind of make sense in the short term. One of the things that mitochondria do when they're under attack is they stop taking all that oxygen and making energy with it. In what we just saw, the electron transport chain and all that, right? They stop using oxygen for that purpose, and they turn that oxygen against the cell by taking that oxygen and creating reactive oxygen species. They create oxidative stress on purpose, because when the cell is in a danger response, this is what Naviaux calls a cell danger response, it's better to just nuke everything inside that cell, destroy that cell so other cells can survive. So it's almost like a little bit of a suicide mission. in a way, you know. There's a Spanish TV show that we were watching the other night, and there was the funniest thing is that this is not really funny, but it's kind of funny. But the guy that was the gardener, they had a little line in there where he was like a kamikaze pilot, and I was like, wow, okay, he must have not been a very good kamikaze pilot. He's still alive, right? That's not funny, but the cell tries to destroy itself intentionally by generating reactive oxygen species and by generating inflammatory fatty acids, and it crams these fatty acids into the membrane, and it's just like destroying, and that starts to signal out to cells around the cell that's being damaged that this cell is getting taken down, and that you guys better start to, you know, get prepared because some virus is here, some heavy metal is here, there's something bad that's happening, something bad is happening. So this is really important because this is what we're up against, is the cell danger response. And this is Navio's work. Again, you got to read this stuff over and over again. This is, you can tell a lot about a person's brain by their graphics that they create, but this is his simplification of the cell danger response. But basically, the short version of it is CDR1 is something bad is happening. What is happening? Okay, there could be a stress, an injury, a toxin, an infection. Something is like turned on the mitochondria, and the mitochondria are going, yikes, not good, not good, not good, not good. What are we going to do? Okay, and then they do what I just said. They start to create inflammatory stuff, cytokines. They start to cram fatty acids that are damaged into the membrane. They start to generate oxidative stress. Once the situation's over, now the virus is gone, the injury is over, the infection's been resolved, whatever, right? Then you go through this restorative phase where you start to repair things and remodel and rebuild, and then you go into this cycle, right? So now the cell's back to normal again. But for a lot of our patients, they get stuck in one of these phases. They get stuck in CDR1 or CDR2 or CDR3. And so the mitochondria are just like cycling in this negative feedback loop, sometimes even though the original stressor is gone. And this is what we're up against. So we have to figure out where are the, you know, what stage of this are the mitochondria at, and then how are we going to fix all that? And here's a little breakdown on different stages. So the cell danger response, initially, if you're in CDR1, you can have allergies, asthma, chronic infection type problems, CDR2, metabolic syndrome, CDR3. Now we're into our chronic fatigue syndrome type patients, okay? Chronic fatigue type patients, this extensive damage that's occurred to the mitochondria, gone bad, and the body's unable to repair. So the solution is pretty obvious. If you see where the problem is that you need to like push the mitochondria through CDR1 to CDR2 to CDR3 into the restorative phase so that everything resets. That's what our goal is, that where are they at and how are we going to fix them? And then I'm going to, again, like I said, skip a few of these slides. I just love this title of the study, or a quote from this study. Mitochondria are hubs of inflammation. Mitochondria are hubs of inflammation. So when you're healthy and you're exercising a lot, this is a good thing, right? One of the things that happens is you breathe in a lot of oxygen. You're on the rowing machine, or you're jogging, or you're biking. So what happens to all that oxygen? Well, it creates oxidative stress. That's what oxygen does, yeah? Creates all this oxidative stress. So if I go out after this call, which I'm gonna do, and I do an hour-long bike ride, maybe an hour and a half if I'm lucky, then I'm gonna be breathing hard a lot, and I'm gonna be generating a lot of oxidative stress. That's a side effect of exercise. In fact, they've shown that if you take antioxidants during or right after exercise, you negate a lot of the effects of a lot of the benefits of exercise. So the fact that mitochondria self-destruct, that's protective. The cell danger response is protective. The fact that the mitochondria are hubs of inflammation, that's a good thing if you're healthy and you're exercising, because that inflammation and that oxidative stress is a stressor, and then we grow stronger in response to that, okay? Where it's bad is when we're stuck in these loops that they don't turn off. So when I go for a bike ride for an hour and a half later and my body gets really inflamed from cranking up some big hill on a bicycle, then you know, by tomorrow, that inflammation is going to be gone and my body's going to have to respond to it, and it's made me stronger. What we're worried about is when people are stuck in these CDRs and they're just rotating through this problem over and over again, okay? And again, we'll come back to some of these drawings or images as we start to look at questions that you guys may have. So I just want to mention one other thing because it's important and you don't see a lot about this, which is how the electron transport chain works and how it relates to CoQ10. So we talked about it briefly, but just to reiterate here, because this is an important part of this whole treatment plan. Here's your CoQ10. It's carrying electrons along the electron transport chain, but it's also a very powerful fat-soluble antioxidant. So it's very protective, as well as being involved in the actual mechanism of moving energy around. So CoQ10 takes on this kind of extra important role. We don't need to worry about these too much. Okay, we're right on time. So now we talked about oxidative stress. Oxidative stress can be really good, like if you're exercising, that's a good thing. But when it's chronic, it causes an excess of damage, right, to mitochondria. So ironically, mitochondria are the major source of oxidative stress in the healthy body. If you're healthy, you're exercising, you're eating right, most of your oxidative stress comes from the mitochondrial production of energy, because almost all the oxygen that you breathe in and out goes to this, you know, mitochondria place where you're going to be making energy using the oxygen in those final stages of energy production. So when the oxidative stress gets excessive, now we're into a really big problem, because now we've got actual damage to the mitochondria themselves. And let me see where's, let me just go back a few here. So these enzymes that are used to make energy, it's a good example right here, are proteins, right? So it's different proteins. And this one in particular, we're going to look at on the labs. You see that succinate dehydrogenase, that one, just remember that one, succinate dehydrogenase. So if you have a lot of oxidative stress, that oxidative stress comes and it hits this succinate dehydrogenase enzyme and it damages it. It's like shooting bullets at a person or something, like bing, 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 you know, it's getting damaged. And then it doesn't work very well, okay? So oxidative stress can damage these mitochondrial proteins. And when that happens, they don't work very well. And succinate dehydrogenase, this particular enzyme right here, is particularly sensitive to environmental toxins and to oxidative stress in general. So when that enzyme gets damaged, you're going to see it on an organic acids test, because succinic acid is going to be high. That's so cool. Succinic acid going high tells you that this enzyme is messed up. That tells you that you're not making energy properly. And it tells you how to fix it, because if you know what are the nutrients that help regulate that enzyme, then you can know how to fix it. But in the bigger picture of things, in order to really get your mitochondria healthy, you also have to be able to get the proteins repaired so this whole system can work properly. And you have to take the oxidative stress down a notch so that they're not getting damaged anymore. Those are the goals. So we want to pull the patient out of this chronic cell danger response. We want to get the oxidative stress levels down with antioxidants. Do this all based on the testing. And then you want to get these enzymes to work well again using things like free-form amino acids, CoQ10, etc. That's the secret here to make all this work. And if you do have questions, just type them in. We'll have questions at the end. I'm just going to get through the slides kind of quickly here. Okay, so also want to give a shout out for environmental toxins, because it's not just internally generated oxidative stress. Environmental toxins are a huge source of oxidative stress, and they have an absolute devastating effect on mitochondria. Okay, and we're all full of them. We're all full of hundreds of these environmental toxins, and one of the main things that these environmental toxins do is damage mitochondria and make people extremely tired. So you have to remove the sources here. So you have to deal with clearing out toxins from the body, heavy metals and chemicals and whatnot, as well as addressing the mitochondria and the oxidative stress. That's the bigger picture here. We'll talk a little bit about antioxidants already, how they work. I think you guys should know that, most of that stuff. So let's see. Yeah, I think we can jump right into the labs now. Oh yeah, and you can, I mean, it's not all about supplements. You can do a lot of this with food. I'm not like a food teacher kind of person. I'm much more like lab interpretation of supplements, but I put this slide in so I don't forget to say, hey, we're assuming people are eating really well and that you've got people on an antioxidant rich diet, you know? We're assuming all that. Okay, so now we saw the mitochondria and we saw those enzymes. Those enzymes are in what? They're in the mitochondrial membrane. And what's that made up of? That's made up of fatty acids, like all membranes in the body. Okay, so there's a kind of extra super important aspect here of understanding lipid peroxides and how when we have certain types of oxidative stress, lipids are damaged. And here's a nice lipid membrane, okay? And here it is getting kind of blown up a little bit. We don't want that. And so high levels of oxidative stress mean that lipid membranes can be damaged. They mean that proteins, which are the enzymes that we use to make energy, can be damaged. So when you're on the repair side of this, how do you get the repair done? Free-form amino acids to help repair the proteins that are damaged. Fatty acids like omega-3 and different kinds of membrane repair products to repair cellular membranes, the membrane around the cell, which is damaged by the mitochondria, and then the mitochondrial membranes themselves have to be repaired. So those two things are essential for every chronic fatigue patient. Testing and correcting amino acids so you're repairing, the body's able to produce and revitalize all the proteins that are damaged. Those are the enzymes that we looked at. And then making sure that the cellular membranes and mitochondrial membranes are repaired with fatty acids. Because those are areas that are damaged and you have to do the repair part. There's a little bit about atherosclerosis, antioxidants. So let's jump into the labs. Before we get there, for those of you that started late, I will mention we have an organic acids protocol design boot camp coming up starting October 7th. You get a 20% discount if you use that code. You can scan the QR code. You'll get an email that has this information in it as well. And if you failed to answer that carnitine question properly, you should sign up for this class. I mean, everybody should sign up for this class. This should be just packed full of you guys because there's a huge interest in this work now. You just have to put in a little bit of time to get your lab interpretation skills up. In this class, we will review real labs that you guys send in. The students supply the labs that we review in the Q&A calls for the boot camp. And then there's an online curriculum, which I spent years working on with Richard Lord, designed to teach you how to interpret this particular test accurately. Okay, so you can have mitochondrial success with every single patient that you work with. It's one of the more important skills to pick up. Something happened in 2020. I don't know if you guys were around, but I think there was this kind of global pandemic. If I remember right, seems like so long ago already. But a lot of people had still have mitochondrial problems as a result of having acquired COVID. I guess we call that long COVID or long haul COVID. There's also a fair number of people that have poor reactions to those vaccines that have similar, if not almost identical, mitochondrial imbalances because of the vaccines. So if mitochondria were a problem in 2019, they're 10x that level of problem globally now. So it's a skill set you just have to learn. You could have maybe ignored it before the pandemic, but now you're going to have a large number of your patients that have, you just have to deal with this, okay? All right, so let's take a look at labs. Okay, so this is an organic acids profile from Diagnostic Solutions. This is the summary page, let's call it. But for our purposes, as we're interpreting these labs, we want to get right into the data pages so you can see. These are so much better to look at. It just gives you the context, so you can see how bad things really are. Okay, so let's take a look here. So now we talked about pyruvic acid, and we showed that in that diagram, you have to convert glucose into pyruvic acid, and then it goes into the citric acid cycle. So if pyruvic acid is high, it means that that enzyme, pyruvate dehydrogenase, isn't working properly, so you're not able to get glucose into the mitochondria. And this would be the very beginning of insulin resistance. Some patients may be insulin resistant if you see a high pyruvic acid. Some of them are just on their way there. They're not quite insulin resistant yet, but it's coming up. And so then you want to get that enzyme to work properly. And they have a little cheat sheet here. They tell you the name of the enzyme, pyruvate dehydrogenase. And in case you don't know, they show you which are the nutrients that you need to make that enzyme work properly. B1, B2, B3, B5, and lipoic acid. And if you get enough of those B vitamins and lipoic acid, that enzyme is going to start to work again. And guess what? The pyruvate will go into the energy pathways and the person will feel better. And you're, in a sense, either preventing or reversing insulin resistance. Here's the other one I mentioned, see succinic acid down here. Where does that come from? Well, we just saw that comes from that enzyme being screwed up. If succinate dehydrogenase, the enzyme, is not working well, then this marker goes high. So you can see each one of these markers reflects an enzyme either working or not working. Those enzymes are made out of protein, right? They're all proteins, and the enzymes can get damaged from oxidative stress. So we want to protect the enzymes, we want to get them working right, reduce the oxidative stress. That's the goal. And that will help push that person out of this stuck mitochondrial phase and into a phase where they can start to repair. All right, so pyruvic acid, super high. Succinic acid is not high, but I was just mentioning that because we saw it on the other person. And let's see here. What other markers do we got? A little bit with the catecholamines. That's not really what we're talking about today. And, oh, there we go. Oxidative damage. Okay, so 8-OHDG, that shows, if that's high, it shows a high level of oxidative stress. So now we have enough to build our program just from those two factoids. So let's go into program design mode. In fact, before we do that, let me just show you again in case you forgot all this already. See now, okay. First of all, we're gonna work with antioxidants, and there's two types generally. There's fat soluble and water soluble antioxidants. And this is kind of important because if you want to protect the membrane, remember the cell membrane, or if you want to protect the mitochondria itself, the membrane in the mitochondria, you want to focus on, not exclusively, but you want to include, let's say, fat soluble antioxidants that'll protect membranes because they're fat soluble and they'll go where the membranes are because the membranes are all fat. And then you can also independently, and pretty much always will also separately use water soluble antioxidants like glutathione and vitamin C. But you want to use usually a combination of the two, fat soluble and water soluble, and they do slightly different things. They work in slightly different ways. And some of them overlap. Some of them do both. Like I think glutathione works both in a lipid environment and in a watery environment too. So pyruvate is high. Pyruvate dehydrogenase isn't working that great. So we're seeing pyruvic acid is high. That means glucose is not getting down here. We want to open that up, and we're going to use B vitamins to do that. We also saw a lot of oxidative stress. So when there's a lot of oxidative stress, all these structures in here can become damaged, and we want to not let that happen. Okay, so the person can start to heal and repair. Okay, pretty straightforward. What are the goals here? Improve glucose metabolism, which obviously is going to help with energy. Reduce oxidative stress, which will obviously help with energy as well. And so we know from that report, you can see it printed right on the report, high pyruvic acid means we're going to use B1, B2, B3, B5, and lipoic acid. Usually that means using a B complex, say like twice a day, plus some additional lipoic acid. Usually that comes in like a 300. Sometimes people have a 600. So if it's really messed up and that lab was pretty messed up, you can use anywhere from 1 to 2 of these twice a day, anywhere from 600 to 1200. 1200 lipoic acid is kind of a lot. So let's say if this is a beginning group, then I would say 300 twice a day, but you should know that you can go higher. And sometimes, depending on how messed up the person is, you may want to use some extra thiamine. That's kind of like a question mark. Not always, but sometimes. And I'm gonna just show you why. Once you learn these pathways inside and out, you'll be doing this like no problem, just like riding a bike. Here, let me show you here. So this is one of the more important enzymes in the human body, pyruvate dehydrogenase. Pyruvate dehydrogenase. So here's another view of what we were just looking at. Here's your glucose. You're trying to get it into the citric acid cycle. Here's your pyruvate. In this case, pyruvate and lactate were both high, so there's a bottleneck here. It's not working. And we're going to use these B vitamins and lipoic acid to kind of burst through here so we get the energy going down into there. Okay. And in a minute, we're going to look at one that has a fatty acid problem. Same. We're going to use carnitine to open this pathway up so we can make energy there and relieve the fatigue problem. Because obviously you're going to be tired if you can't do this properly biochemically. So here, check this out. Pyruvate requires thiamine or B1 to kick things off, then lipoic acid, then the other B vitamins. So you can have a bottleneck right here with thiamine. You just give a person like 100 milligrams of thiamine once or twice a day, and boy, that'll change things pretty quickly, okay? Because that'll just get this whole thing moving, and then lipoic acid does the second step, and then boom, you finish it off over here. So sometimes you need some extra thiamine. I'm just pointing that out. Not always, but sometimes. We're not going to do that for this one. This is like a beginning one, but I put a question mark there. And then we want some antioxidants to reverse the oxidative stress. And so the easy ones that are, sort of used all the time, back to CoQ10, you could do 100 milligrams of that a couple times a day. And another super common one that's used would be N-acetylcysteine or NAC. Comes in a 900 milligram, you could use that. NAC converts into glutathione. If you don't like NAC for some reason, you're anti-NAC, you could use glutathione itself, but you got to get the liposomal form. And that's usually going to be like in 100 milligram liquid or something like that. And you could use that a couple times a day. So CoQ10 and NAC, if you don't like NAC, you can use glutathione, but you want a couple of antioxidants to make all this work. And then some kind of a multi-pack. And the multi-pack is going to have omega-3s. Remember, you need the omega-3s to repair the membranes. It's going to have magnesium. You need a lot of magnesium to make energy. It's going to have additional antioxidants. So some kind of a multi-pack to make all that work. And that would be an appropriate program based on that lab to get relief from the fatigue that's happening because the mitochondria aren't working. And then you want to also associate with that the appropriate type of exercise, right? Which in general is what we call like a zone 2 exercise is going to help the mitochondria work better. And then if the person is able to, and that could be for someone who's got chronic fatigue, that could just be walking every day, right? So that could just be walking every day. So now we're going to look at another case. Okay, here's another test. Again, organic acids profile from Diagnostic Solutions. And we're skipping over these summary pages because we're more interested in the actual lab report itself. So now in this case, a different chronic fatigue patient, pyruvic acid and lactic acid are fine. So maybe they're taking B vitamins. Maybe they're really careful about their food. Maybe they just don't have, maybe they have great genes and their ability to process glucose is fine. There's no way that this person could be insulin resistant, which many people are. They don't have that typical metabolic syndrome. They're just fine there. So a lot of people would just be like, oh, okay, I guess I don't need to worry about that. But we now, with our extra special knowledge, are immediately suspicious and we're thinking, what about fatty acid oxidation? They can burn glucose. What about fatty acid oxidation? And then you're like, well, I don't know. But this doesn't look very good, does it? Adipic acid or adipate, adipic acid, is sky high. Subearic acid, sky high. That means that they're not able to burn fatty acids. That's going to cause a major energy deficit. Okay, that makes you in the category of worse mitochondria on the planet versus best. And so again, you need Zone 2 exercise to improve the mitochondrial efficiency, like I was talking about with the professional cyclists and how they train. And then you need a nutrient, which will remain unnamed. You're going to all remember it for now, for the rest of your lives, probably carnitine. These markers are also high. What are these? I don't know, cis-aconic acid, isocitric acid, alpha-ketogluteric acid, succinic acid. These being high is problematic. So let's take a look at what that actually means. When your body has a carnitine deficiency, adipic acid, subearic acid, ethylmalonic acid, these different markers will go high, and that's what we just saw. That means that instead of the fatty acid going through here to acetyl-CoA to make energy, you're getting a block. So there's a buildup of these particular compounds. That means that in this case, in this patient, carbohydrate metabolism is fine, but fatty acid metabolism is a big problem. You're going to see this all the time. If you learn how to interpret these tests, you're going to see this frequently. And that, I don't know, can we say that's a crisis? Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty big crisis because that's your main energy system for the whole body. There's no way that things can be normal if that's busted up. Why does that happen? I don't know. Probably most of it is a combination of genetics and environmental toxin exposure. So again, let's go back now. You saw fatty acid oxidation, that section of that pathway, that's this section of the test. Once you memorize that pathway, you'll always know what this section of the test means. And I think they don't really tell you here. Okay, well see, this is like secret knowledge now. Look, if you look underneath here, they're saying acetyl-CoA dehydrogenase. They're telling you the enzyme that's related, and B2, but they're not mentioning carnitine. Okay, so this is absolutely carnitine deficiency. How much carnitine do you want to use? I'll show you in a second. And then these markers over here being high, cis-aconitic acid, isocitric acid, alpha-ketogluteric acid, succinic acid, those markers being high. What the heck does that mean? Those are each reflecting an enzyme that's not working properly. So let's go look and see the enzymes are right here. We're looking at them. And this is the basis of this whole test. You see, if this marker here is high, it means that that enzyme's not working well. If isocitrate is high, it means that enzyme's not working well. If alpha-ketoglutarate is high, it means that enzyme's not working well. If succinate is high, it means that enzyme's not working well. So every time you get a high marker, it means that you're not able to push along through the citric acid cycle. And the way I explain it to patients, it's like a bicycle chain that's got a bunch of links that are broken, because this is an integrated system. Each one of these enzymes has to work, and then you make energy properly. But if you've got 4 of them that are busted up and aren't working, it would be like a bicycle chain, and there's 4 links on it that are broken. Not going to be super successful with energy production. So this patient has problems with carnitine. These markers are high, and problems with 4 of these enzymes. I think it was cis-aconitate, isocitrate, alpha-ketoglutarate, and succinate dehydrogenase, those 4 enzymes, okay? So how do you fix that? Well, it's kind of in this diagram a little bit. Mg's, magnesium, B3, lipoic acid, but you don't have to be super complicated about it, because there's a generic way you can just get all these working. Thankfully, someone has thought this through long before we came around and put this together. So let's design another program. So this is our program for beta oxidation. And what was the other problem? Oh, TCA cycle. It's so confusing because it's the same thing as a Krebs cycle. It's the same thing as a citric acid cycle. It's all the same thing. Different companies, different researchers call it different stuff. It's all the same thing. It's the energy production part of the mitochondria. So there's problems with beta oxidation, there's problems with the citric acid cycle. So you're going to use L-carnitine. I don't know, it comes in like let's just call it a 400 milligram pill, depending on what you get. But you want a total of around 2,000 a day. So that would be something like 2 and 2 and 1. So around 2,000 milligrams a day. It's a lot. But like for this person, it's like life-saving daily. It can cause loose stool. So if you can start them slow and kind of work them up on it gradually. Start with like 1 a day, then 2 a day, and gradually go up. And then you also need B2 and magnesium. So then we're going to have this multi-pack that'll have our magnesium and B2. And then we saw the citric acid cycle itself wasn't doing well. So we need CoQ10, say 100 milligrams. This person seemed kind of more messed up. So let's do like that. You're going to need some extra magnesium because you're not going to have enough magnesium. Let's say your magnesium total per day is, let's say, 400 to 600. And I usually use magnesium glycinate. That seems to be a good one. Usually that comes in 100 milligram. Okay, so you're gonna have some extra magnesium in there. You're definitely gonna need extra B complex. And then this person doesn't need the thiamine. I think that might be it. So carnitine, multi-pack, CoQ10, magnesium, and B complex. There are also products that are out there that most of the bigger companies have that have all this stuff crammed together. It'll be called like mitochondrial boost or mitochondrial this or mitochondrial that. So a lot of times it's easier to use a combo mito product. Sometimes they're in powders, most of the time they're in pills. Depending on which brand you're using, you may use 2 to 4 of those. I think of those as like mitochondrial multivitamins kind of combo products, depending on which company you use. Okay, Designs for Health has mitochondrial NRG, Pure has mitochondrial ATP, Metagenics has MitoVive. Every company will have the Mito Boost product. And it's kind of convenient because it's got all these things together in one product. All right, let's just look at this just so you can see another example. Once you've seen 400, 500 of these tests, you're going to get this down. Your first 20 of these, there's no way you're going to be anything except confused. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. It's true for anything in life. I'm sure if you're like a great artist, your first 20 things you painted probably weren't great, So it takes a little bit of training and time to get good at this, but it's a skill that's widely needed and that's rare. Most functional medicine practitioners that call themselves functional medicine practitioners couldn't interpret one of these tests to save their life. And that's a sad and pathetic thing in my mind. And it's inexcusable. We have these classes. They're not that expensive. They're easy to do. It's all online. You don't have to fly anywhere or do anything like that. Let's see. Oh, that doesn't look good, but that's like a different day. That's all brain stuff. We can do a brain class later, maybe. Here, this looks important, doesn't it? Okay, so these are oxidative stress markers, and I'm glad this showed up here. We'll wrap up on this thought, okay? Alpha hydroxybutyric acid, when that goes high, that's a sign of glutathione deficiency. Pyroglutamic acid, also, when that goes high, that's a sign of glutathione deficiency. And if we're thinking about the protection of the mitochondria, the protection of your metabolism, basically, which is the whole point of what we're talking about today, right? Then that is accomplished by glutathione to a large extent. So here's the structure that we're trying to protect. The mitochondria, where we're burning fat, we're burning carbs, we're making energy. And the ultimate sort of shield around this, the protector around this, that's protecting this from all the bad stuff, all the oxidative stress that could come and hit, is glutathione. So you have a glutathione shield that's protecting your body or your cells, your mitochondria, from oxidative stress. So you want to keep the oxidative stress out here and neutralized. So if your glutathione levels are low, that allows damage to occur to these enzymes, and that's a problem. So in that particular case, you need to get the glutathione levels up, and everybody has a different way of doing that. I like to use NAC. You can use glutathione, obviously, if it's a glutathione problem, you definitely use glutathione. But usually I use a combination of NAC, and depending on how messed up the person is, you want to dose them pretty high, and glycine. That combo together gets glutathione levels up. You can use glutathione itself too, totally fine. or you can use a combo of NAC and glycine, which are the precursors to that. Okay. And then, all right, let's take a pause for a second. We're going to switch over to questions. So type in your questions, whatever they may be. We're going to show this because we're going to have swarms of you signing up. I'm telling you, you can learn how to do this. You get 50, 100 tests under your belt. And here's the thing about the bootcamp is that if you were going to wait until, let's say a minimal level of competency, minimal level, you need 50 to 100 tests. 400 to 500 people get good at this. So are you going to use 50 to 100 of your patients? I don't know, you could. You could, but that's kind of lame, right? And it's going to take a while. Like, how are you going to talk 100 people into doing this test that you don't even know how to interpret yet? It's going to take a while. So when you're in the boot camps or when you're in my mentorship class, everybody else is supplying the labs. You guys are testing each other. You're going to have like dozens of these tests that we look at over and over again. So that first 50 to 100 tests can be compressed into, you know, a short period of time, like 6 months or something, if you stick with the live calls. And after the boot camps are done, you can stay on a live call if you want to keep interpreting labs. And in a typical Q&A session, we usually review like around 6 tests. So do the math. You need to do 10 Q&A calls. You'll be at 60 labs that you've reviewed. They're not all your patients. It doesn't matter. Once you've seen 60 of these cases, even though like 50 of them or 55 of them are somebody else's cases, then you're going to get it. And then you'll be an expert at this. So the boot camps provide you with like a crash course in clinical exposure to that first 50, 60, 100 tests. And we can do that in a matter of months. And if you're trying to do that in your own practice, it could easily take you a couple years. And plus, you have to burn through all these patients, and you're going to screw it up in the beginning. You're going to screw up a lot of these cases. So why not just learn from other people's cases? And the trend in the last couple years has been all the practitioners test themselves, which I love, because that's like 20, 30, 40 tests right there. You're halfway to your goal of being able to figure this stuff out just by looking at the other practitioners in the class and you guys figuring that out, okay? So each of the live Q&A calls lasts about an hour. And then outside of that, the boot camps are made up of, you know, just online lectures that you listen to. You know, so you listen to the lectures online in your own time, and then every couple of weeks we have a live call where we review labs. It's not a huge time commitment. So they're every other week for this session, you know. It's like usually anywhere from 4 to 6 of them, depending on how long they are. Yeah, and this whole, oh, that's Kathy. Hey, Kathy. This whole thing is, like, as you say, on demand. All the live, so this is Christina. Yeah, all the live calls are recorded. So if you have work commitments or family commitments, or you have this thing called children that you have to deal with, then totally fine. Everybody's busy, right? We're all busy. So then you can basically listen to the live calls, and you can submit a lab and say, hey, Kalish, I can't attend the class. Can you review this lab? And I'll review the lab even though you're not there. And then you can listen to it in a day or two. And yeah, we have people all over the world doing this. We have people all over Europe, the Middle East, Central America. So you can be in any country and still do these classes. How do you get these supplements to be tasteless? That's not possible, I don't think. So do these interventions help individuals who have poor oxidative stress genes? I mean, they're even more important if you have genetic tendencies. I mean, honestly, most of the people that are, you know, have serious chronic fatigue have got some genetic reason why that's happening. So I'd say 98% of the patients I've worked with in that category, most of their problem is genetically based, you know, that's used. And so we're always dealing with that. We have to. And you can run all the genetic testing too if you want to make sure that you get that figured out. And then how long should you retest? Should you do a program before you retest? So generally around every 6 months, if you're going to do glutathione support or carnitine support, you would stop around the 6-month mark, get them off the supplements for a week, and then retest. Yeah, you can do carnitine in a liquid. That's a great product. You can do 3,000. The range on carnitine dosing is 2,000 to 3,000 a day. The boot camp is a couple months long, and we'll get you some more specific info on that. Let's see. Tara's asking for the mock protocol slide. Here we go. That should show it there. Take a snapshot of that if you want. So initial functional medicine lab for athletes, you could do organic acids testing. That gives you a huge amount of information for sure. Huge, huge, huge. Supplements, does it matter between pills, powders? Not really. If you have, I mean, as part of the correction that we're talking about here, we're also always correcting for diet and gut function. So most people don't absorb very well because their gut's not working well, but you have to correct that in the bigger picture. But the supplements that we're talking about are well absorbed if you're using the right companies, okay? And so most of these programs are around 6 months long. I wouldn't do this in children until you have a lot of experience. And you can't, or you shouldn't use carnitine in people that have serious thyroid problems. So for that, you have to just, figure a workaround on that. Yeah, this is a great question from Brian. Is a simple way, correct simple way to communicate to patients for what an organic test is important for mitochondrial function, energy. So it's 4 things. Why should I do this organic acids test? We want to check your mitochondria to understand things like fatigue and metabolic health. We want to check your liver detox pathways, okay? We want to look at brain health and gut. So it's detox, mitochondria, brain, and gut. Those are the 4 big things on this test. Detox or liver, liver detox, brain inflammation, those kinds of things, neurotransmitters, gut, and mitochondria. Did I say that right? So 4, liver, gut, brain, and mitochondria. Those are the 4 when you're explaining this to patients. And I think we're out of time. Thank you guys for all your questions. All right, take care. Bye for now.